everyone, and it's a great privilege to be invited to deliver the memorial lecture organized by Janasamskriti, which I don't think any progressive person, let alone a Malayali, can ignore in the city of Delhi. I find it, particularly when I saw, along with the invitation letter, when I saw the other names of speakers who have delivered this lecture in the past, I feel really very small. I don't think I'm competent enough to raise the level of discourse today to that level in any form, because those are people from whom I have learned a lot, and there is very little that I can do to match their level and caliber. Nevertheless, I will try my best to sort of at least go away from here without any bad remarks from any of you. It's a privilege, also primarily because I belong to a generation which has not met AKG. I was probably 3 years old when he died. We have had chances to work with or interact with others like EMS Nambudiripat in the later years, but not with Comrade AKG. He was but from what we know of him, from what we have read about him, we know so well that he was one of the one of the trinity, as you call it in the state of Kerala. One of the trinity in the sense that EMS, the great theoretician, Krishna Pillai, the great organizer, and AKG, the great mass leader. So it is this trinity that in some sense laid the foundation for what you see as modern Kerala today, and he stands really tall in the set of three people that we have. It is not for nothing that he was called Pavangalde Padathalavan, the commander-in-chief of the poor, to give it a flowery translation. Wherever issues of the poor and the marginalized were concerned, AKG was always personally present on those occasions. May it be in Punjab, may it be in Maharashtra, may it be in Kerala, may it be in Andhra Pradesh. He was personally present in most of these locations of struggles to stand with the struggling people of these areas. He was equally active, as we know, in the parliamentary and the non-parliamentary spheres of political activity. He was, as we know, the first opposition leader in the Indian Parliament when Jawaharlal Nehru was the Prime Minister. But that great presence is supposed to have told Nehru, Mr. Prime Minister, I may be speaking in broken English, but I don't speak broken truths. When he that great sort of power of integrity that he carried with him to the parliament never allowed him to sort of ignore the non-parliamentary struggles of the left. That is another very important feature of his life. In fact, very few people may be aware of the younger generation today that while we see a lot of struggles against displacement from land across the country today, one of the first struggles against displacement from land was actually organized in the small area of Amaravati in the central Travancore region of Kerala in the 1960s. In braving the monsoon rain, AKG slept in a tent for many days to sort of lead the struggle personally from that location, and moved from that location only after ensuring that the struggle was a success. So these are things that are well known about AKG, the leader, and worth remembering when we are organizing this AKG Memorial Lecture today. Finally, he was a leader of the peasants. He was a pillar of the All India Kisan Sabha, with which I also have some privilege of working in, along with my friend Viju here. And it's fitting in some sense that I am today speaking on the question of agrarian distress in India in memory of that great leader of peasants of India, Comrade AKG. Now, in the little time that I have, I plan to sort of take a historical bird's eye view of the question of agrarian economy of India, agrarian society of India, but focusing more towards the greater part of my lecture on the period after 1991 and sort of characterizing what we call today as the agrarian crisis, agrarian distress, or whatever you may want to call it. So friends, in the tradition in which Comrade AKG and others thought about India's agrarian economy and agrarian society, one of the most important features of that tradition of thought was that they thought that the resolution of the agrarian question of India is actually a national question of India. And he himself was part of a leadership which wrote it to the program of a political party as well. So what does this mean? What does this mean by saying the agrarian question is a national question of India? It means that it is a question that concerns the largest masses of working people in India. It means that only by institutional transformation of the rural sector, only by a transformation of the agrarian relations, the relations of production in the rural areas, can the foundation be laid for rapid agricultural growth on the one hand, while at the same while on the other hand liberating the masses of working people from different forms of unfreedoms in the rural areas. So agrarian question in this tradition is not simply something that concerns agricultural growth per se. It is also concerned with the multiple freedoms of people. The freedoms of the working people, the freedoms of agricultural laborers, their freedom to obtain a small piece of land of their own, to reduce their dependence on the landlord, to shrug off their dependence of the moneylender. All these were integral parts of the resolution of the agrarian question in the tradition in which AKG and others saw the problem. However, it's well known that even after 65 years of independence, the agrarian question of India is hugely, that remains unresolved. If you look at the data, about less than 2% of the total operated area has been redistributed in any form in the whole of the country. Less than 4% of the total operated area has been given to tenants, allowing them some kind of security of tenure. Less than 2% given to landless laborers, and less than 4% in terms of security of tenure afforded to the tenants in different parts of the country. If you take the total number of people touched by some kind of agrarian reform in India as a whole, it does not cross more than 6 to 7 crore in a country of 120 crore people. This is an indication that the Indian state, led by a bourgeois landlord political formation, has failed India's working people in the most fundamental fashion by its failure and incapability. Failure is on the one hand, it's an empirical experience, but incapability is also a theoretical question. Their mass base is not with the working people, their mass base lies with the landlords and the rural rich, which sort of pushes them to a situation where they are unable to resolve the agrarian question in any decisive way. So there is an inability, incapacity on the one hand, and an empirical failure on the other hand. Both combined together means that very little of land has been redistributed. So land, largely the monopoly of land ownership, remains a feature of India's rural society even after 65 years of independence. That's a very important point to begin with. There are of course honorable exceptions where Comrade AKG's party ruled in Kerala, in West Bengal, Tripura. All these are places where there is some effort at least to implement land reform and move towards some kind of resolution of the agrarian question. If you take Kerala, West Bengal and Tripura out of the situation, out of the picture, the what I mentioned about less than 2% of the operated area and less than 4% of the area under tenancy, it will come down to less than 1%. If you take Kerala, West Bengal and Tripura out, that 4% becomes 1%. So that is the, so in some sense, if there has been any implementation of land reform in India, any movement towards a resolution of the agrarian question, any movement towards providing more freedoms to working people in the rural areas, it has been in these three states ruled by the left. That's a unquestioned fact that exists before us. Now, this resolution, lack of resolution of the agrarian question meant that different types of contradictions emerged in the post-independence era in the way in which India's agrarian economy evolved. One of the major features was the problem of poverty, of course, on one hand, which I'm not going to because it's too obvious. But on the other hand, India was largely unable to increase its agricultural production in any decisive way. In other words, food shortage, food inflation, and the inability of the agricultural sector to release energy and resources to develop the industrial sector and the services sector was extremely weak and fragile by the 1950s and 1960s. So this kind of food constraint building up meant that the Indian state had to ensure that its capitalist structure remains intact, industrial growth proceeds in some form unhindered, that the agricultural production had to be increased. But to increase its agricultural production, it was not ready to go through the route of resolving the agrarian question. It in fact went through the route of a technological intervention to increase agricultural production. That is what we call as the Green Revolution. So Green Revolution of the 1960s, largely a reaction to the food shortage of 1957-58, 64-65, 65-66 and so on, was actually a reaction of the Indian state, a response of the Indian state to somehow ensure that agricultural production increased even when the agrarian question remained unresolved. Now, this took in 1957-58 itself, when the first food shortage came about, the Jawaharlal Nehru government went to the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation for help, and the report of the Ford Foundation, India's food question and ways to meet it, very clearly pointed out that there is a way to increase agricultural production, and that way is to ensure that all your energies are focused on those classes and those regions, those classes and those regions which can immediately and quickly respond to a technological or other kind of stimulus to increase agricultural production. This was repeated, this sentence, this phrase, you will find it exactly repeated in the fourth five-year plan of 1965, say in the later part of the 60s, after the planned holiday of that period. You will see that intensive agricultural development, which is what we call as Green Revolution in India's history, can be achieved through focusing energies on those classes and those regions of people who can immediately respond to a stimulus. There were no one but the landlords on the one hand, and those regions means those regions which are already irrigated. Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, Coastal Andhra, these are regions where already enough irrigation investment had been made in the colonial period itself, and in an era where the government of the period, through the first 3 or 4 5-year plans, was completely not ready to invest any significant amount on irrigation development and other kinds of rural infrastructure, meant that this was the only way in which agricultural production can be quickly increased. So you basically have a situation whereby high-yielding varieties of seeds are released as a technological package into the rural society, with, of course, strong help from foreign institutional agencies which provided aid to the program. And you had a Green Revolution program, which is also called the Intensive Agricultural Development Program, implemented in the rural areas. Now, this kind of a technological stimulus to agriculture did increase agricultural production. There is no doubt about it, because in the 1950s and 1960s, India was largely called as a ship-to-mouth economy. Ship-to-mouth means the PL, Public Law 480, PL 480 grain, which was food aid from the United States, used to come in a ship to the ports of India and used to be directly transported to the mouths of the poor. So ship-to-mouth existence was India's predicament. The 1965 devaluation of the Indian rupee, Indira Gandhi was forced to devalue the Indian rupee in 1965, is largely related to the bargain tactics that United States had adopted vis-a-vis the PL 480 food aid available to India. If you don't devalue your rupees, we will not be able to continue with PL 480 food aid. Indira Gandhi was supposed to have been in so much tension that she went to see a night show the previous day of the evaluation called Dr. Shivago to relieve tension. So those are stories of those times. But the idea was that food sovereignty, food self-sufficiency was concretely linked by the experience of those times to political sovereignty. A country can be politically sovereign only if it is food self-sufficient. That is what the 65 experience told India's policymakers. That was a lesson from India's food crisis of the 1960s. That is why great amount of manpower went into, resources went into the Green Revolution program. People like M.S. Swaminathan and other scientists of those era were greatly enthused by this action, this initiative of the Indian government, even though it came without a resolution of the agrarian question, without the implementation of land reform and so on top of an already unequal agrarian structure. They were part of the great initiative of increasing agricultural production because they felt sufficiently enthusiastic about the goal, which is to transform India from a food-dependent country to a food self-sufficient country. Now, this, however, meant that the increase of agricultural production that occurred was not without its biases. There were three major biases in the agricultural production experience of the 1960s and 70s. That is part of the Green Revolution, which is that this whole agricultural growth was biased in terms of crops. This experience was felt only in rice and wheat. This was biased across regions. As I just said, it was largely in the irrigated tracts of India that this experience was concentrated. It was biased on the basis of classes. That is, because investment was required in the purchase of seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, implements and so on. Only those sections of the rural economy which had the capital, which had access to finance to participate in this experience could actually take part in this growth strategy, and as a result you also have a new bias which is across classes, so across crops, across regions, across classes. So the Green Revolution experience, in the absence of the resolution of the agrarian question, was very clearly biased across these three dimensions. Now this meant that there was another point which is attached to this, which is the following: that this kind of unevenness, this kind of bias in the Green Revolution experience also meant that some regions of the country were surplus and other regions of the country, large parts of the country, were deficit. Right? So almost all the increase of agricultural production, which led India from a ship-to-mouth existence to the political sovereignty experience, was concentrated in a few regions. Now, this meant that other parts of the country were left out, and some strategy had to be devised to ensure that grains are transferred. The gains of Green Revolution are spread across the country, and that's how the national food policy comes in. But before I speak about the national food policy, I'll quickly emphasize on four major initiatives of this period, in addition to the technological input of the Green Revolution. Often it is thought that Green Revolution, much like the Industrial Revolution of Europe, is actually a technical thing. It's actually a technology-centered intervention, but it is often misunderstood. So it is often not quite appreciated that the Green Revolution was actually an institutional intervention as well, because it was not simply related to the intervention in terms of technology. It was also an intervention in terms of four other features. I'm going to explain, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on these four features. The first is, in addition to technology, farmers also received price support. And that's where I come back to this question which I just left abstract a bit, which is the national food policy, the balance between surplus and the deficit regions. Now, because there was this group of states which were surplus and other states like Kerala, for example, which was deficient, it required a kind of national food policy to ensure that the benefits of green revolution were spread out across the country, different parts of the country. And hence the government comes out with a price support policy which actually supports both the producers and the consumers in the same way. For example, producers are given access to what is called as a support price and a procurement price in this period. This came with the Green Revolution strategy of the 1960s. So support price is a price at which the government sets a floor price. It does not allow prices to fall below the floor price. If the price falls below the floor price, the farmers can go to the government and sell it at that price. Procurement price is the price at which the government buys food grains from different surplus regions of the country and actually uses the new institution established in 1965, which is the Food Corporation of India, again a new institutional intervention, to ensure that these grains are procured from the deficit regions and passed on to state civil supplies corporations in states, which would in turn distribute these grains through the public distribution system or the ration shops to poor people in the deficit regions of India. So you see here a strategy of supporting both the producers and the consumers. It is a contradictory goal because producers want higher price, consumers want lower price. So it's a contradictory policy. But it was very effectively carried out thanks to the idea of food subsidy. Why is that? Because you provide a higher price to the producers, you give food to the consumers at a lower price, and the government puts in the rest, the difference the government puts in, which is called as a food subsidy. Now, through this instrument of food subsidy, the government effectively managed the interests of the producers on the one hand, the farmers on the one hand, and the consumers on the other hand, who are largely living in the deficit regions. So, price support. So, establishment of the Food Corporation of India, establishment of the Agricultural Prices Commission in 1965, which would actually decide what is a support price and procurement price. All these were institutional measures instituted in 1965 to ensure that the Green Revolution strategy does not simply revolve around technology, but also as institutional public support to be carried out. The second, the price support was the first pillar. The second was subsidy support. A lot of inputs came to be used with Green Revolution, and these were not priced at low levels. You had to pay a higher price to buy fertilizers, to buy diesel for your pumps, to buy seeds, to buy pesticides and so on. So you basically had a subsidy policy whereby inputs were charged at lower than their actual price, and farmers were incentivized to use the new technology by providing them inputs at a lower price. It's not simply a helping policy, it's not simply an assistance policy, it is an active incentive policy to ensure that farmers adopt new technologies while they are trying to increase agricultural production. That's number two. Number three, credit support. This was the time when large parts of rural India were under the dominant hold of the money lenders. That's how the bank nationalization comes to be introduced in 1969. The bank nationalization of 1969 is a very important support measure for Green Revolution that is introduced at that point of time. Before bank nationalization, industrial houses owned many of these banks which existed. They ensured that the deposits are used to give loans to their own chamchas, as we call it today, their own friends and in the corporate world, often sometimes to their own companies. Money was actually shifted out. These practices came to an end with the bank nationalization of 1969. This bank nationalization of 1969 came with three important features. First, you nationalized banks, and then you told them, number one, that if you want to open one urban branch, because they were all situated in urban areas at that point of time, if you want to open one urban or metropolitan branch, you should open at least 4 rural branches. Only then you will get permission to open one urban branch or one metropolitan branch. This meant that rural branch network of scheduled commercial banks in India expanded phenomenally after 1969. In 1969, only around 1,500 rural bank branches were there in the whole of India. By 1991, it had gone up to 34,000. So from 1,500 rural branches to 34,000 rural bank branches was the achievement of bank nationalization, which was very crucial in supporting agricultural investment activities of farmers. What did banks do? These banks, what do typically banks do? Banks typically mop up surplus or savings in the rural areas. Savings are lying in the hands of many people, scattered. There are others who require money for investment. But those who require money for investment don't know that 10 people sitting here have this money. But the bank actually contacts these 10 people, puts that money in one place so that the needy person can come and actually take it from one place and not from you 10 people separately, who he doesn't know. So this is the historical role of the banks, which Marx also spoke about in the Capital, in the Bank of England performing that particular role. But the question here is that this role was performed in India by scheduled commercial banks after 1969 by mopping up the surplus of the Green Revolution from the rural areas into a single place. But that's not enough. Credit needs to be given. Banks can open but they need not give credit. That meant a second feature of bank nationalization, which is called priority sector requirements. 40% of the net bank credit was to be compulsorily given to priority areas like agriculture, small-scale industries, khadi gramodyog, weaker sections like scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and so on and so forth. So 40% had to be compulsorily given to these sections. Out of this 40%, 18% had to be compulsorily given to agriculture. This meant, so all these new bank branches opened. There was also this requirement that money should be compulsorily lent to them, which meant that banks were actually forced to give to farmers. So all the investments that happened, private investments that happened in the farmers' fields, current and capital of the post-1965 period were financed by banks nationalized in 1965. That's another important form of support which was provided to the farmers. So you have price support, subsidy support, credit support, and finally you had marketing support. Now, marketing in the field of marketing, the field was largely dominated by itinerant traders in the period of the 1950s and early 1960s, where there was absolutely no transparency in price formation. There were large number of malpractices in the weights and measures practiced in this area, which meant that farmers were at a great disadvantage vis-a-vis the trader. It is this disadvantage of the farmer vis-a-vis the trader which was thought to be overturned by the reforms in the agricultural marketing sector through ensuring that states passed the Agricultural Produce and Marketing Committee Acts, or the APMC Acts. These APMC Acts in each state formed what are called as the regulated markets, or what we call as mandis today. These regulated markets were supposed to be transparent locations of price formation, whereby farmers could come, sell, see the price of that day, which is publicly displayed, sell it to whichever the highest bidder that they want to sell to, and go back home with the best price that they could get. This was a very important institutional change of that period, which again assisted the growth of agricultural production through Green Revolution. So you have price support, subsidy support, credit support, marketing support. There are two more supports, and I will end the story of supports, which is one on agricultural research and the other on agricultural extension. Agricultural research, there was actually almost very little agricultural research happening in those areas, in those periods. One of the biggest shifts that happened was with the 1960s Intensive Agricultural Development Program. Public sector agricultural research received a big boost. That's the time when Dr. Swaminathan and others were leading the movement within the scientific community. They basically ensured that India's public sector led from the front in developing new varieties, new seed varieties, new technologies, and so on, for the benefit of the farmer in order to increase agricultural production and productivity. This would not have been possible in the absence, the changes of the technological changes of the Green Revolution would not have been possible in the absence of this kind of intervention. Apart from agricultural research, you also have interventions of the state in agricultural extension. Agricultural extension means lab to land, which is the technologies which are developed in the laboratories of the scientists have to be taken to the farmer's field. Somebody has to carry it, demonstrate its attractiveness and its viability so that the farmer can actually adopt the technology. So this task, which is called as agricultural extension, was absent in the earlier period. All this new cadre called village extension officers, VEOs and all are products of this period, where you would develop a large extension network in the rural areas of the country to ensure that farmers are well advised about what technology to use, what seed to use, how much nutrients to apply, how much water to apply, when to apply, and so on. This technical advice was also significantly instrumental in increasing production and productivity. So I have sort of laid down on table a large number of institutional interventions which actually went into the making of green revolution. I promised you when I began that I will spend most of my time on post-1991 experiences, which I am going into now. Now this, so if you consolidate this story of the pre-1991 era, you have India's inability to resolve the agrarian question on the one hand, but at the same time some kind of growth of agrarian capitalism still taking place through green revolution. It meant a technological package, but it also meant significant public institutional support and intervention in the rural areas in the realm of prices, subsidy, credit, marketing, research, extension, and so on. Now, we come to 1991. By 1991, the argument is made in the following form. The argument is made that all the policies that you have followed between 1960s and 1990s were actually anti-farmer. They actually militate against farmers' interests. Now that might be a very surprising statement to hear, because from all that I said till now, everything happens to be can be read as pro-farmer. Somebody is coming and saying that this is anti-farmer. Now, the reason why this argument was made, primarily by the World Bank, followed by other international financial institutions, and partly by India's ruling class itself by the time, who has internalized this logic of structural adjustment and stabilization of the World Bank, IMF, the group, international institutions, is that any kind of intervention in the market or against the logic of the market will actually deprive the farmer of the market price. So what did you do by installing a procurement price? You installed a procurement price and you ensured that the farmer was not able to sell to the open market and get a higher price. As a result, what you did was you tilted the terms of trade against agriculture, while typically terms of trade should tilt in favor of agriculture. The terms of trade tilting against agriculture has a role in history where it is assumed that in a backward country, resources for industrialization should basically come from rural areas. You should basically take resources in the form of food and labor from the rural area and invest in industrialization processes, whereby you can increase the overall economic growth. So this idea of getting cheap food from the rural areas for the urban workers who are actually producing in the sector of industry was what was represented in some form. It comes from the Soviet experience of the 1920s itself, right from the time when Lenin was alive in 1921. It comes from that era that you use the rural area as a source of labor, capital, savings, and other resources to feed into the industrialization process that will lead to overall economic growth. That was the idea. Now, this has been, among neoliberal economists, neoclassical economists, an idea that has been hotly contested. They argue that by doing this, you're actually shifting the terms of trade away from agriculture. You're actually depriving the farmer of a higher price. You're actually not allowing the farmer to go to the market and sell, where he would have actually got a higher price. And you've actually given him a lower price, which is called the procurement price, which is what India had during the national food policy, the system that I mentioned a little while back. Now, this was a very important argument made. It was also argued that you actually have an overvalued exchange rate. If you actually devalue your exchange rate, you can actually ensure that farmers can actually export as well. When you devalue your currency, export becomes more attractive and imports become more costly. Right? So by devaluing your rupee, you can actually ensure that farmers can be export oriented as well, and a lot of the produce that they produce can actually be sold not just in the national open market, they can also be sold in the global open market, where prices are ruling higher. Global agricultural prices are ruling higher than the domestic agricultural prices. As a result, if you allow the farmer to export his commodity freely and remove all the barriers of procurement price and FCI and PDS and so on, he can actually get a higher price by exporting when he wants to into the international market, just getting that higher price. His incomes will increase and the terms of trade will tilt in favor of agriculture. Now this argument, which focuses on prices, you can see that the core argument in this logic is, or core logic in this argument, the core logic in this argument is that if the farmer is deprived of a higher price, if the price problem is taken care of, that's what neoclassical economics calls as getting prices right. You got prices wrong by actually creating a system of procurement price, support price, input subsidy, and so on and so forth. You are distorting prices. Right? In other words, prices are not reflecting their actual scarcity value or relative scarcity. What is price? Price increases when there is more scarcity. Price reduces when there is abundance, right? So price is actually a reflection of the relative scarcity value in economic theory. Right? This is being distorted, right? Instead of allowing prices to be formed on their own in the market by going up and down relating to the scarcity of the commodity or abundance of the commodity, you are actually going in and interfering and setting a procurement price. Nothing above, nothing below. It is nothing but distortion. As a result, farmer is deprived of a higher price. Now this meant the corollary of this argument was that if the farmer is getting this higher price, he will actually invest more, he will produce more, and the country will have higher and better agricultural production and productivity. That is the core argument behind liberalization of agriculture. Core, there are more, I'm coming to that, but core argument is all forms of distortion in the sector of prices have to be removed. So procurement price has to go, FCI has to be shut down. Right? If procurement price is not there, there is no procurement and there is no FCI, you don't need a PDS also. Because you are arguing that private trade will transfer the food grains on its own from Punjab and Haryana to faraway Kerala. Right? So if there is no procurement, there is also no need for PDS. Right? But then you have to have some kind of buffer stock, right? Okay, that can get out tomorrow. You need some stock to fall back on. So you keep a little bit for that. A little bit you keep for buffer stock. You only procure to keep that buffer stock and ensure that the rest is sold in the open market. Close down the FCI. Close down the ration shops. If not, if you don't want to close down the ration shops, at least ensure that only the needy are provided the food subsidy. That is, purchase at lower price from the ration shops. Who are they? Who later came to be called as the BPL. So to convert PDS into APL and BPL, you divide consumers into APL and BPL, provide subsidy only to the small BPL category, and you procure only for them. Rest, let them sell in the open market. This was the argument which was primarily put forward. That's the second argument. Second argument was the whole edifice of the Green Revolution was built on the argument that you can move from shift to mouth to political sovereignty or food self-sufficiency. But this argument said that why do you need food self-sufficiency when you can sign the WTO agreement and obtain food grains from the global market by selling whatever you are producing, you're good at in producing. So why don't India diversify from food crops into fruits, vegetables, and so on, which it can sell in the global market, and using that money, it can import wheat from the United States, rice from Japan, or rice from Vietnam or other countries, and it can actually take care of its food requirements. So all the effort to increase agricultural production, food production and achieve food self-sufficiency doesn't have any meaning, because in the era of free trade you can always buy and take care of your requirements. This actually also goes against another logic of the earlier era. Land reform, or the resolution of the agrarian question, was thought to be as important in order to meet the requirement of having an agricultural surplus. The argument was, you need land reform, you need agrarian reform in order to ensure that the food shortage in the country is taken care of, is addressed, and enough food is produced to feed the urban industrial workforce, and so on and so forth. But this is not required. In the era of free trade, land reform has no meaning. In the era of free trade, land reform is not required to increase agricultural production. You can always import it. Right? As a result, the new economic policy that came out after 1991 was also fundamentally opposed to land reform or any kind of agrarian reform. This argued that institutional transformation of the rural areas can be bypassed using free trade. Right? Now, you need fruits and vegetables to be produced so that you can diversify and sell abroad. If fruits and vegetables are to be cultivated on a mass scale, you need companies to come in which can actually take up production in 400 acres, 500 acres and so on, right? Produce on a mass scale, bring in modern technology and allow the country to export these fruits and vegetables into the international market using the foreign revenue of which you can actually, foreign exchange revenue of which you can import food grains. This has a problem, this has a barrier. What is that barrier? The land reform laws, which actually sets a ceiling on land ownership and operation in many states. If the land reform laws say that one family can own only or operate only around 20 to 25 acres, how can a company own 400 acres? Right? It will be an illegality. To take care of this illegality, states were asked to reform or amend their land reform laws to reduce or to sort of weaken, dilute the ceiling provisions in land reform laws to allow corporate farming into their rural areas. So land reform law itself becomes a casualty in the new era. Right? So land reform laws in many states, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Gujarat, have been amended to allow exemptions for corporate farming from the ceiling provisions of these legislations. So this was another important feature of the new economic policy. There is more. Every support measure that I spoke about, prices, subsidy, credit, marketing, research, extension, in each of these areas, the new economic policy had a different argument. I have spoken about prices. I have spoken about subsidy. Both are subsidies in some form because they distort prices and as a result allow the terms of trade tilt against agriculture and hence they are banned. So all price support needs to be withdrawn. All subsidy support for fertilizers etc. also needs to be withdrawn so that their prices actually reflect their relative scarcity value. Credit. Bank nationalization is a reality. You cannot escape. You cannot privatize banks. You want to privatize banks. You have been trying for 25 years. You have not been successful in this long period because of the heroic struggles of the bank unions. But you can tinker with multiple aspects of guidelines in banking to ensure that the your objectives are met. I spoke about 2 points in the post-1969 era. One, the 1:4 policy. The banks have to compulsorily open 4 rural branches for 1 urban branch, and second is priority sector guideline. Without privatizing banks, the government simply lifted these guidelines out of the system. 1:4 policy does not exist anymore. Banks can open and close branches wherever they want. You can open all between 1995 and 2005. The data allows comparison for this period. About 1,000 rural bank branches were closed down between 1995 and 2005. So this policy does not exist. Priority sector, that is 40% should go to the priority sectors. Out of that, 18% should go to agriculture. This also, they didn't touch these numbers, 40 and 18, but they basically killed this intervention by putting more and more things into what is constituting agriculture. For example, if Pepsi company wants to start a potato chips factory, right? Potato chips factory. Factory produces chips. Chips come from potato. Potato is grown by the farmer. The farmer is going in the land, and hence it is agriculture. So a Pepsi company goes and takes a 300 crore rupee loan from State Bank of India to open a chips factory. It can be considered as agricultural credit and priority sector. It can come in this 18%. I am giving you a small illustration. There are many more things done, but more horrendous things done. But I am giving you a simple example because of lack of time to show what kind of reform actually came about in this period. So agricultural credit does not remain agricultural credit anymore. I'll explain a little more when I come to each of this. But this was changed. Marketing. Progress has been slow, but the central government has been putting pressure on state governments to amend their APMC Acts. Right? To amend their APMC Act to ensure that these mandis do not exist anymore, or the power of the mandis for the regulated markets are cut down significantly, so that players like Reliance Fresh and so on can actually go into the rural areas and purchase directly from the farmer, which is not allowed currently because they have to sell in the regulated markets compulsory. Right? So, and then comes research. Public agricultural research, funding to public agricultural research is cut sharply in real terms, not in nominal terms, but in real terms. As a result, alongside, great encouragement is provided, particularly in the seed sector, for global multinational companies to come in and set shop in India. Monsanto being the classic example. So public agricultural research is weakened and private agricultural research is encouraged. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh is supposed to have said once that the first green revolution of India came via the public sector research institutions, and the second green revolution of India, which is a dream of these people nowadays, second green revolution of India might well come through the private sector research agencies. All the hopes are pinned on Monsanto to create a second green revolution in India. Extension. That's the last part of that I mentioned. Here, the reforms have taken the form of the following: that every extension activity has to recover the cost. So every intervention in terms of extension activity of agricultural departments should ensure that farmers pay for that advice, and the cost that the government incurs in providing that advice is met. It's like a user fee in hospitals. Like the farmer gives a user fee for the use of agricultural advice given by the state. Thus, every agricultural extension activity of the state, its costs are fully covered, and the government does not incur an expenditure towards advising the farmers. This has been the very important change in extension services. So you can see, every institutional support measure which the farmer received from the time of Green Revolution was adversely hit after 1991. Price support, subsidy support, credit support, marketing support, research support, extension support. None of this exists today in the same form that it existed in the 70s and 80s. And that has been a direct impact of the liberalization policies in agriculture. Let me, in the remaining time, 15 minutes? Yeah, sure. Yeah. I have more than 15 minutes. Yes. So now this that allows me some kind of leeway to sort of get into some of the intricacies of this policy. Let's take one by one. The first argument made was related to terms of trade. That is, if the farmers get a higher price, they will invest more in agriculture, and production and productivity in agriculture will increase. That was the argument. Now, opposing this argument does not mean saying that farmers should not get a higher price. That's not the argument, right? Everybody is happy if the terms of trade shifts against agriculture. But the problem with the argument of the liberalizers is the following: that all eggs are in one basket, which is called terms of trade. Historically, what does the evidence show? If the farmer gets 1 rupee more or 1% more in terms of output price, how much does his production or productivity increase? Right? Evidence shows, data shows that only 0.2 to 0.4 times improvement takes place if there is 100% change in the output price that he receives. That is, all the benefits of price increase do not transform into production increase. Why is that? The reason is very simple. The farmer does not look at price alone. The farmer is looking at whether inputs are available at good prices and quantities. The farmer is looking at whether institutions are conducive to increasing productivity. The farmer is looking at whether technologies are adequately available to move into a higher production possibility frontier. Right? In other words, price is not, evidence shows, evidence has clearly shown historically that price is important, but price is not the only factor which influences production and productivity in agriculture. It depends on, suppose you get higher price, okay, you get a higher output price, your output price increases by 10 rupees, but your input prices all increase by 12 rupees. What is the point of having a higher output price? Number one, you get 10 rupees more, right? But out of that, you are in a institution from your import. You are a tenant, right? And the landlord takes away a large part of the higher price that you receive. He's left with no incentive to produce more because of much of the increase of production the landlord has taken away. This is an institutional barrier. The first one is an input barrier. Second one is an institutional barrier. Climatic barriers will be there. Soil conditions may not be conducive for increasing production and productivity. For that, technology has to come in. That technology has to come from the public sector, not private sector. Right? Now, in a larger environment where public agricultural research is weakened, these innovations will never come about, and the farmer will be stuck with the low level of productivity, even when output price has increased. So, in other words, a higher output price, which is what the neoliberals promised to the Indian farmer, we'll come to the promise in a little while, which is what they promised to the Indian farmer through shifting the terms of trade in favor of agriculture, did not come about in any part of the world, or came about in parts of the world only very weakly. About 20% or so is transformed into higher production productivity. That is the first issue. But there is a second issue. In terms of trade, economists would know that shifting simply the terms of trade in favor of agriculture doesn't help, because there's an old argument in economics that if developed countries, what is the colonial division of labor that India has had? From colonial times onwards, developing countries produce primary commodities and developed countries produce industrial commodities. When incomes rise across the world, right, the amount of money that you would additionally spend, the amount of money that people will additionally spend to purchase food will be lower compared to the amount of money that you additionally spend in buying industrial goods. Because how long will you eat food? After a point you will shift to other commodities, non-agricultural commodities. You may buy a fridge, you may buy a better toothpaste, you may buy something else, but you basically diversify into non-agricultural commodities as well. So in this kind of a situation, it is what two economists of the Latin American structuralist tradition, Rolf Prebisch and Hans Singer, argued in the 1970s, that in a situation where the division of labor between countries exists between developing countries producing agricultural commodities and primary commodities, and developed countries producing manufactured commodities, as this trade grows, developing countries producing agricultural and primary commodities will be increasingly marginalized. Their benefits would increasingly be lower and lower, because people would start buying lesser and lesser food as incomes go by. And this will actually create a bias in favor of developed countries and against developing countries. Now, this situation has not changed in any way. Historically, the terms of trade between developed countries and developing countries has continued to deteriorate against developing countries, because they are still stuck in the production of agriculture and primary commodities and trading. That is why importance of industrialization comes in. That is why those countries like China, which have been able to diversify into manufacturing from agriculture, because they resolved their agrarian question early enough after the Chinese Revolution, they could move into high-tech manufacturing and so on, and could actually go against the tide, whereby terms of trade in primary commodities was strongly moving against developing countries. India could not. India is largely not a player, but still, in the little extent that it is involved, it is not. It has not done anything to relieve this pressure in any form. Now, this meant that higher terms of trade, higher price as an argument is theoretically itself flawed. I repeat, this is not an argument against higher prices to farmers. They should get higher price. But the problem is when a policy focuses only on this and creates everything else adverse for the farmer and focuses only on price as some kind of a panacea for improving incomes is flawed theoretically itself. Right? That's terms of trade. Second, it said, let's sign the WTO agreement, let's go with the GATT agreement, and free trade will come, and farmers can actually export a large quantum of their commodities and can actually earn the higher global prices that existed as opposed to the lower domestic prices that existed for agricultural commodities. Theoretically, this is also looks very deceptively attractive. But is that international prices are 50 rupees, Indian prices are 30 rupees. Indian farmers should be allowed to export. They can get that 50 and they can get higher incomes, which is a good thing. People would think, oh, why not? A lot of people bought into this argument. But the only catch in this argument is that about 120 countries signed and everybody was given the same promise. Right? As a result, everybody produced more, everybody exported more, right? And that 50 rupees, because of a glut in the world market, became 20 rupees. I'm giving you an illustration. This is just a crude illustration, right? As a result, the situation after 97 in particular, when people said export rice, right? People said at that point, I remember a paper which argued that India exported at that point, early 90s, something like 5% of its total rice production. Right? 5% of its total rice, basmati largely, it was exporting. Right? Suppose India exports 6% of its rice production, and not 5%. 1% it increases its exports. Right? What will happen? That paper argued that the global rice prices will fall by 20%. Because India's 1% is huge. And the global market does not require so much of rice. Right? And global prices will fall, and all the promises that farmers receive in terms of getting those higher global prices will be unrealized. In fact, that's exactly what happened. In a large number of commodities, global prices, soon after the WTO agreement was signed, crashed down. So the whole agrarian crisis that we saw between around 96-97 and around 2004, when these crash of tea, coffee, spices, plantation crops, all these things happened in that period, was primarily related to this deceptive promise of the WTO agreement. Everybody exported. Everybody wanted to share in that promised pie or promised heaven, may I say. So the global prices crashed. There's also another problem. How do you set your domestic agricultural policy looking at a price in the world market? Right? Is there a problem there? There is a problem for two reasons. Global agricultural markets are highly volatile. Today it's 50 rupees, tomorrow it's 40 rupees, day after tomorrow it's 70 rupees, then again it's 20 rupees. You can't set a national agricultural policy keeping this volatile market as the benchmark. It's highly problematic. Right? Those who know about Kerala's experience here will know about vanilla's rise and fall. Right? 1999, Madagascar had a cyclone. Right? Madagascar's vanilla crop was destroyed. Everybody liked Madagascar vanilla. It had a flavor. Right? Madagascar vanilla prices went up to 4,000 rupees a kilo. Right? At that time, 4,000, even more sometimes. Everybody in Kerala went into vanilla. Okay, people were cultivating coffee. Coffee prices were crashing. Right? People cut coffee and planted vanilla in the year 2000. Right? And They got a windfall gain in those 2 years. All of them got extraordinary prices in 2 years. Why? Because Madagascar replanted in 2000 after the cyclone of 1999, and vanilla requires 2 or 3 years of gestation period to fully flower. First harvest comes out after 2 years only. In those 2 years when Madagascar vanilla was growing slowly, Keralites made a killing, right? But then nobody told them Madagascar has replanted. Their production will come back. Nobody likes Indian vanilla. People like Madagascar vanilla because it's got a better flavor in the international market, right? And when they come into the market, your prices will crash. So please be careful. But you need an extension system for that. But extension system is dead. The best extension system in Kerala in this matter was Malayalam Manorama. I'm sorry if they are here, right? But that happens to be the case, right? Nobody told any farmer of Kerala that, look, be careful, don't do this, or go slow on this, or have some coffee and some vanilla. Diversify a little bit so that your risks are low. No, everybody wanted to make a killing. They did. But then, when Madagascar coffee entered back in 2002 or 3, I think, you came down to 200 rupees a kilo from 4,000 rupees a kilo. People wanted to go back to coffee, but going back to coffee is also a problem because coffee also has 3 years gestation period. In those 3 years, you will not have any income. People are stuck. This is a classic example of the fallacy of forming a domestic agricultural policy, looking at a global agricultural market price, which can go up and down at its whims and fancies. Whose whims and fancies? That's my last point, which is people often think that global agricultural market means Indian Prime Minister will go with 10 kg of sugar, Pakistani Prime Minister will come with 20 kg of sugar, they will trade and so on. Is that how global trade functions? No. Global trade is dominated not by countries and governments, but by multinational corporations. Take example of cotton. 85% of the total cotton trade in the world market is handled by 5 multinational companies, not countries or governments. They have deep pockets. They will hold when they want to. They will push up, push down, prices as they wish. Right? You cannot set your domestic agricultural policy in which food self-sufficiency is a major goal by looking at this fluctuating, volatile global agricultural market. That was the major fallacy of India's agricultural policy in this period. You signed the WTO agreement and thought that everything will fall into place. You will get access to agricultural markets of the world, which you never got. That's why Doha round failed in a big way. You never got access to US market or the European market in any form, right? And you are basically stuck with allowing imports into your country but not having any kind of export growth. If you look at this period, your exports grew by something like 11%, agricultural exports, but your imports grew by 22%. Imports grew by 22%, but your exports grew by only 11%. In other words, you imported more than you exported in agriculture, while the promise of free trade was that you can actually export more and you can even bypass land reform and agrarian reforms to increase agricultural surplus, by which you can actually purchase food grains from the world market. That did not happen. Right? So we are done with terms of trade, we are done with free trade. There are a few more. One of the core issues here, that's a very simple point. Every farmer will know, you don't need an economist to say this, that one of the most important outcomes of the first 2 measures, price support and subsidy support, has been farming has become uneconomic. It's a very common knowledge. Farming has become uneconomic. But it has to be appreciated. It is underlined. It is not simply a uneconomical nature of farming which has come up. It is actually a policy-induced outcome. What is this policy-induced outcome? You refuse to increase MSPs. Minimum support prices, the government does not increase. Why? The government thinks that not raising minimum support prices is a good thing because it will prevent inflation. Right? So minimum support prices are not raised, particularly after 2009 and 10. Minimum support prices have not been raised at all. Under the argument, and actually in the last economic survey of the government, it actually commends the RBI for its position because the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India commends the government for its stance of the MSP because it says the government has not raised MSPs for the last minimum support prices in the last 3-4 years. It has actually become much easier for the RBI to contain inflation. Right? But the result has been, one, you don't raise MSPs, so output price is weakened on the one hand. Global trade has meant that more imports are coming than your exports. So they also exert a downward pressure on the prices of your agricultural commodities. So imports are coming, your prices are falling. On the other hand, your government is not raising your MSPs also. This is called the classic policy-induced uneconomic nature of farming. On the other hand, your input subsidies have been cut and prices of fertilizers, prices of pesticides, prices of seeds, prices of diesel, prices of irrigation water, all of this have gone up significantly, and you basically have the classic scissors crisis, as we call it, in some sense. That is, the scissors has two blades, right? You can consider one as output price, the other as input price. The farmer is basically cut by both. Lower output price and higher input price, both of which adversely affect him in a very deep-rooted fundamental sense. So your weakening of the price support, the weakening of the subsidy support has meant that farming in this country has largely turned uneconomical. Go to every village. Foundation for Agrarian Studies in Bangalore does a survey of about 22 villages for the All India Kisan Sabha. They found that in every village they went to, 20% of the farmers made a negative income. Every village. 15 to 20% of the farmers suffered a loss in farming. They are not the same people. If you go another year, there will be another 20% will be lost. It's because farms are different in nature and so on. This has been a very new feature of the economics of cultivation in the last 20 to 25 years. Credit. I'm just going one by one. If you take credit, I said the old regulations are gone. Any bank can open any branch anywhere. But the most important change happened in the field of priority sector lending, whereby I gave you the example of Pepsi. You can actually open a potato chips factory and you can actually get something as agricultural credit. I'll make 3 points which will explain how adverse this policy has been for the Indian farmer. What is the most important claim we made? That agricultural credit has been doubled or tripled. That is a claim of the government. But look at it closely. You will actually see that only 42% of the total agricultural loans given to farmers today are of size less than 2 lakhs. Only 42% of the total credit given out, agricultural credit given out today, is of size less than 2 lakhs. Remaining 58% of agricultural loan is of size more than rupees 2 lakhs. Now tell me a farmer who takes a more than 2 lakh loan, except he is a 15-acre sugarcane or grape farmer in some parts of India, they don't take more than this. Where is this called credit going? To all kinds of agribusiness companies and others who are taking loans in the name of the farmer, and the government is selling off these as loans given to farmers. About 1/3 of the total agricultural credit given in this country actually is supplied from urban or metropolitan branches of banks. Urban or metropolitan, Chandigarh, Delhi, they give 25 to 33% of agricultural loans in India. Where is the farmer here? Thirdly, anybody who has basic knowledge of agriculture would know that no farmer takes a loan in the month of February and March. He'll take in June, right? When the rains come, right? In India, about 40% of the total agricultural credit is disbursed in the months of February and March. In a paper we wrote, we called it the Great March Phenomenon. Right? Which farmer takes loan in March? We asked this question in a presentation to the Reserve Bank governor, and he was like looking either way. No. So this is the way in which agricultural credit has been transformed. Farmers have been sidelined. The share of formal sector in the total debt portfolio of the Indian farmer, share of formal sector has fallen, share of informal sector has risen, share of money lenders in particular has risen. The farmers are in greater indebtedness and debt burden today than he was in 1991. The 25 years of financial liberalization has left us with more indebted farmers, heavily indebted farmers, and a much powerful money lender in the villages than in 1991. Right? Take any, so I'm not going into each and every aspect of the argument here, but if you look at it closely, this I can again make this argument for agricultural research, agricultural extension. All these have been devastated. Right? Take the. I'll make this one point, and I will come to the conclusion. I think I'm slowly coming to the end of my time. Take this simple case of GM technology. Genetically modified crops. I personally believe, I know that many people in the left have a different opinion on this, I personally believe it is a technology of great potential. It's a technology of tremendous potential. Okay? However, we have completely, thanks to liberalization, we have completely messed up the agricultural research situation in the field of GM technology. The core of this, you see a lot of resistance against genetically modified crops across India. In my view, the basic weakness of this movement has been its inability to distinguish between the technology on the one hand and the political economy of its ownership on the other. You want to fight Monsanto, which is actually owning GM technology. That is not a fight against GM technology. We have confused these two. Right? Why is this confusion happening? And what should be the response of, for example, the left in this? The left should be arguing that Monsanto should be driven out of research in BT research and GM research, and the initiative should be taken up by the public sector research institution, just as it was in 1960s. Right? Lot of organizations, NGOs and so on, however, do not see it this way. For them, the enemy is the same as the owner of that technology. The technology and the owner of the technology are fused into one. As a result, you are not putting forward the slogan of taking the technology from Monsanto, putting it to social public service through public sector research. You are actually against Monsanto and you are against the technology. Both have to be rejected. The problem in this is the following. As a result, what has happened is, in the agricultural research system, there is a core argument between varieties and hybrids. What is a variety? Variety is something that farmer can reuse in the next season. Some people who have learned plant breeding basic, dominant allele, recessive allele in plant breeding will know. Right? On the other hand, a hybrid can be used only once. It can be used again, but it will not give the same result as the fresh seed bought from the market, because the recessive gene may actually dominate the dominant gene, and as a result, you may get lower yields as a result. I'm not getting into the science of it. But this meant, if you leave this technology to the private sector, they will not produce variety. They will produce only hybrid. Why? Because if you produce variety, you cannot sell every year. Farmer will buy once, and then he will say, I will save and reuse. So they will never produce a variety. They will produce only a hybrid. Public sector, on the other hand, can be asked to produce varieties. They will historically produce varieties at low price also. They also produce hybrids. So even for hybrids, they produce and sell at low price, but that's a different story. But their core area of expertise is in producing farmer-friendly varieties, which the farmer can save and reuse in the next season. In BT cotton, for example, which is the only GM crop that we have in this country, National Agricultural Research System, scientists in the National Agricultural Research System will tell you that India, because it is largely dry land, it is not cotton lands are not irrigated and so on, India should be actually using BT varieties of cotton and not BT hybrids, because of multiple set of reasons. Why? A, what is Bt has a toxin called the crytoxin, CRY toxin. Now, this crytoxin, in the case of hybrids, exists in a heterozygous condition. I'm sorry to use scientific words, but in a hybrid, in a variety, it exists in a homozygous condition. Homozygous means, sorry for this, but capital A or small a. It has only one type of allele, either the dominant capital A or recessive small a. But if you come to heterozygous condition in a hybrid, you have capital A small a combination. Right? This means that in a combination of capital A in a homozygous condition, the toxin is much more effective because there are two capital A's in it to kill the bollworm than in a heterozygous condition where there is only one capital A which is dominant and the other is a small capital A which is recessive, which is a weaker condition. That is why varieties are better suited than hybrids in Indian conditions. Number one. Number two, crytoxin segregates easily in a hybrid, whereas it does not segregate. Segregate means wither away. So easily in a hybrid, but they do not wither away easily in a variety. As a result, they are more stable. Right? Third, variety can be reused by the farmer, while hybrid has to be purchased every year afresh by the farmer. Fourth, if you plant a variety, you can have at least 20 to 30% higher plant density. 20 to 30% more plants you can plant. Density can be higher than in a variety, in a hybrid. Why? Because hybrid is a big man, right? He needs bigger leaves, he needs space for foliage to grow, and so on. So the distance between two plants in a hybrid has to be longer. So you can plant only less number of plants in an acre compared to variety. This is a inefficient way of increasing productivity, scientists say, than in a variety where you can have high density planting, because varieties have less foliage and leaf length as compared to the hybrids. There are multiple reasons for this, but the point is, we are not into this debate at all. Is anyone talking about this today? No. We are all into, are you against GM or are you for GM? Everybody is in two camps, either with me or in the highway. Right? As a result, India's public policy debate on science in agriculture is completely distorted. We are not able to tell, Viju is here, he knows my position on this, we are not able to tell the government that Kisan Sabha has actually done it. The only farmers organization who have done so is that public sector research should be intensified in the field of GM crops, and India should be rescued from the monopoly of Monsanto in this sector. China did it. Viju and I were in China 2 years back, and we saw that China has actually 95% of the cotton area in China is public sector BT variety. 95% of cotton area in India is private sector BT hybrid. China has a friend in this, Pakistan. Pakistan also, because China gives them public sector seeds, probably, right? 95% of the Pakistan's cotton area is public sector variety. India has 95% hybrid cotton of the private sector. This anomaly is a legacy of liberalization, but because of this for or against BT, we are not able to intervene in this and say, you break this. China, as a result, drove Monsanto out of China's market for seeds, because they went in. They used, even in forestry, they used poplar, the trees that they use in Chinese forestry programs. They use BT poplar of the public sector in Chinese forestry programs. Okay? This sort of question is very important. The point I'm making was against the monopoly of seed corporations, but also a minor aside on the kind of positions that the left should take vis-a-vis this kind of technological advancement. Let me come to the final concluding part of what I want to say. What you have in the period after 1991, 25 years of liberalization, which marks this lecture in some form, is that a complete destruction of all forms of public institutional support that existed in agriculture for the farmers from 1960s onwards. That is the most important legacy of liberalization of agriculture in the last quarter of a century after 1991. This the rising, I deliberately did not call my lecture agrarian crisis. I called it agrarian distress, primarily because crisis, everybody equates it quickly with farmer suicides. And sometimes the whole discussion revolves around suicides alone, which is, in my view, a sort of minimizing the problem. Not minimizing the problem. The farmer suicides bring forth a very gory element of the change in the last 25 years, but in some sense it sort of also distracts attention from the distress, extreme distress that millions of farmers who are not committing suicide are also into in the last 25 years. That's not it's not a great innovation, but I sort of wanted to call it distress to call attention, and I wanted to say all these things without mentioning the word suicide, because I wanted to draw your attention to the mass crisis that exists in the countryside, even if you keep these suicides apart. Right? About 3 lakh farmers have committed suicide in the last 20 years or so. That's the most important human rights issue that stands in front of us in rural areas. But even if you keep that apart, you have a crisis staring at you in the countryside. And that crisis is policy-induced. It is the legacy of 25 years of liberalization of agriculture in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ramkumar, for his wonderful lecture, and I'm sure all of us could get some knowledge to improve our knowledge on this particular sector as such. Now we have some brief time for brief clarification. If anybody wants to ask any brief questions, we will have for time open session.
You were underlining the condition of the agriculture, agrarian distress in the country, and at the same point you were talking about the GM kind of seeds and all that. So there is a problem here. I think that you, at a time, talking about you are not in a debate that what is the agrarian distress, basically how this is affecting the agricultural sector, agrarian, the peasantry, the condition of peasantry and all that. Instead, you are just misleading the whole debate into the GM mode of kind of thing. And secondly, Kumar Ghosh has written a book, The Imperialist Penetration on Indian Agriculture, in which he was describing many problems in the sense that how Green Revolution itself was the condition, part of the condition for this imperialist capital inflow. Then the question comes in. So this is basically leading into another kind of distress. In 1991, it is a continuation basically. We couldn't manage with the institutional reforms of the conditions of the peasantry basically. Instead, it has led to the crisis again. So I would say that this penetration, basically imperialist penetration, the capitalist penetration, again paved the way for another distress and another kind of crisis. What arguments
whether it is land labyrinth. Hello. Yeah, whether it is labyrinth income or top income, whatever it is, it should be reduced to an argument is coming. In that condition, we have to protect our some 30 years back we have seen that agricultural workers, now it has been some third time the population has been increased. So in that situation, we have to safeguard the agricultural workers. So this one thing. Another one thing, this fragmentation of the lands, it has given lesser income. So this also for one of the reasons for the suicide. This argument is put forth. So consolidation is required. In that base, both the agricultural workers and the poor peasantry, the basic working class is affected. This argument, we have to mitigate this argument. So in that case, we are affected.
Nobody is asking one more question.
No, I will ask two questions. One is like in a globalized economy, how do you kind of isolate your agricultural system? Because we are constantly in touch with the other parts of the world. And in connection to that system, the big countries, like developed countries, are giving huge subsidies to their agriculture. And what do we do with that? I mean, our farmers cannot do anything with it.
So last question from my part. So this is the agrarian distress we all come to know, and we all facing it. So now where is the left? Organizing such kind of distress, because earlier we know that there were peasant movements and all that, which was all spread all over the country. But now where is the kind of that movement? And instead you again say that that GM kind of debate, entering into that kind of debate instead of that. In Kerala, like some farmers,
some farmers they don't have land. So how agricultural revolution or agricultural self-independence can happen without second land reformation act, and why the mainstream left is against second land reformation?
Thank you very much for the questions. I love provocative questions because they help to provoke me also. The first argument that there's a basic flaw in understanding Green Revolution as an imperialist strategy, as an imperialist penetration. I completely disagree with that for the following reason. I know you got fire in the belly. Hold on. Why do I say so? Parts of the Green Revolution strategy, thinking behind Ford Foundation's report and so on, were part of the larger containment strategy of the West. There's no question about it. Why did they want Green Revolution in India? They could have continued to export more and more food aid to India. PL 480 food aid could have continued to flood India. Why did the US commit the foolishness of sending a Ford Foundation team and allowing India to be self-sufficient. Primarily because they did not want India to become another China. Let's be clear. They did not want a revolution in India. Right? So it was part of the containment strategy that Ford Foundation actively collaborated with the Indian state in allowing India to become food self-sufficient. There's a letter that the US High Commissioner to India, Ambassador to India, wrote back to the Foreign Department office in the 1950s. They said, if we had, they were comparing China and Taiwan. Right? They said, if we did in China what we did in Taiwan in 1945, we could have prevented the Chinese Revolution. Right? What did they do in Taiwan? Land reform. American military under General MacArthur went and implemented land reform forcefully. Right? Now, that allowing food self-sufficiency in India was part of the containment strategy of American imperialism, is without doubt. There's no question. It's written. All the declassified documents will tell you so. But that does not mean that India's achievement when it was an imperialist penetration. Right? India's transformation, പട്ടിണിക്കിട്ട് വിപ്ലവമുണ്ടോ സുഹൃത്തെ? ജനങ്ങളെ പട്ടിണിക്കിട്ടൊരു വിപ്ലവം, അത് വിപ്ലവം. The idea, those who argue that there is an imperialist penetration as part of Green Revolution, refuse to appreciate the depth of hunger. They refuse to see hunger. They refuse to see the suffering of hungry people. And it's the most anti-people academic argument I've ever seen. There cannot be a more anti-people argument. Filling people's stomach is not a pro-imperialist strategy. It's the job of any democratic political formation. Right? And it is true that a large number of technologies that came in as part of Green Revolution, a large number of innovations that came as part of Green Revolution came from international agricultural research institutions. That's true. But what did India do with it? They were all varieties. They were all open germplasms. Indian scientists took it from URI, Manila, and CIMIT, Mexico, reworked it, created open germplasms, gave it to its farmers. This was the contribution of India's public sector agricultural research, not Monsanto. That's why I said the benefits of the first Green Revolution came from the public sector and not the private sector. Right? And that's the democratic character. Suppose Green Revolution had not happened. Suppose we counterfactual in history. I hate counterfactuals in history, but still let's play with it. Right? There is an argument that if food production did not increase, what would have happened? People would have cut more jungles. Today you call it climate change. So if a counter argument can be put in for those who argue that Green Revolution was violent, as Vandana Shiva would put it, right? Green Revolution saved climate change. There can be a counter argument that could be put in as well. Because production and productivity from one unit area could be increased, you could prevent farmers who historically have cut down forests, cleared forests, and moved into areas, released carbon into the atmosphere, and produced more extensively and not intensively. That argument can also be made. Right? No, so that we are not. I have very little agreement with that policy. It is not to say that one sort of agrees with every element of the Green Revolution strategy. That's not the point. But the basic movement of the country from a vassal of imperialism, that is what I call shift-to-mouth existence, to a situation of political sovereignty, even under a bourgeois landlord regime, is to be appreciated and underlined. That is the complexity of that phenomenon has to be politically accepted as complex. It is not something, it's imperialist strategy, forget it. But what about the democratic element within it? Have you forgotten our dialectics?
this has to be appreciated. Now, in the meantime, I'm talking about GM. What's wrong? In 2005, when I said this in the International Congress on Kerala Studies, one person like you got up and said, "You are an agent of Monsanto." I said, "If so, I'll wear it on my sleeves." Right? Now, I've heard it for the last 10 years, so I'm very open to that criticism even today. Right? So what is the point being made? How can a technology, how did the GM technology come up? They used as basis or foundation the open germplasm that public sector research institutions produced from the 1960s, put a gene onto it and sold it for a royalty. That's precisely the point. Technology has been growing. It's about how you capture the benefits of the technology for public service. That is the question. What has happened? What you said about imperialist penetration is true in this case. What has happened as in part of imperialist penetration in Indian agriculture is monopolization of the seed industry by multinationals like Monsanto. So what is the position of the progressive groups like and the left against that to address that imperialist penetration? It is to hit Monsanto where it feels hard. That is, push it out of the royalty business, capture its main business of BT technology, put it into your public sector as China does, and drive it out of the country. That's what China did. There is no Monsanto in China. Why? They did not. No, it's fine. But they did not. We struggle against Monsanto. Instead of struggling as part of mass movement, they have the state in their hand. What they did was they simply put that technology into public sector, produced varieties, and Monsanto quietly walked away. They fought imperialism in their own way. This strength of the public sector research is what we should use to defend our nation state, to defend the people living in the geographical boundaries of this nation state. A democratic state should do all that is possible to defend the interests of people living there. And as part of protecting people's interests living there, this forms a part of it. Not by shunning the technology per se, but by putting it into public use, into public service, by taking the technology in hands, reducing costs, and these people will be priced out. Monsanto was priced out of China, not pushed out, priced out. There was no legislation against Monsanto research in China. They were priced out. So this difference is crucial. It has to be seen as a difference. Number one. And none of this in any form. This argument, if you think it actually weakens the struggles of the left against imperialism, you are completely mistaken. Right? What is actually, I've heard this and I don't mind saying this, that what is actually weakening the struggle against imperialism is actually the position of organizations like Greenpeace. Right? Greenpeace and Monte Calvaria are together in destroying India's public sector research. Let me say it openly. Right? Both of them don't like research. Greenpeace does not like technology. So obviously it doesn't want BT technology either in public sector or in private sector. Right? People like Monte Calvaria historically wanted BT out of the public sector, and they're together in that. Their interests converged. That is why both of them got together and killed what is called as Bikaneri Nirma BT, BNBT, the only straight variety in BT cotton produced by public sector Central Institute of Cotton Research in Nagpur. Central Institute of Cotton Research in Nagpur, public sector research institution, produced a straight cotton variety, BT variety, not hybrid, variety, called Bikaneri Nirma BT, and gave it to farmers. I've seen it, farmers cultivating it. They're very happy with the result. But all these conspirators got together and accused contamination in that variety and killed it. They are now advocating hard. I know farmer leaders in Vidarbha, not of the left, farmer leaders in Vidarbha who were vociferous in their opposition to BT at one point of time. Now the same people are arguing for the introduction of BT variety in the public sector. Vijay Javandiya. Right? They are arguing for introducing BT varieties in the public sector today. Why? Because we lost something like 6 to 8 years in order to put this technology into the public sector and put it to the benefit of the farm. Now, Comrade Pinocchio's point about neglect of land reform. Of course, I mentioned that as the opening statement itself, because the focus of my talk was on the post-1991 era, and even there I did mention that land reforms is actually totally, fundamentally itself inimical to the agenda of liberalizers. That point is obvious in my presentation, but I'm sorry if that point did not come out as clearly as it should have. I think the importance of land reform is increasingly becoming urgent. The importance of land redistribution to the backward sections of the society is increasingly becoming urgent, and that holds true for Kerala, states like Kerala also, which have had one round of land reform, which had provided land to large numbers of people, but because of multiple changes of governments and so on, people with land were able to move out land of the surplus category, and the government being unable to take away surplus land and redistribute to the landless. Large number of landless people continue to exist in Kerala, and they also are part of the question that I'm talking about. It's just that the intensity of the problem is a little less in Kerala compared to other states that Comrade Pinocchio is talking about. So the dependence on agriculture should be decreased. Nobody disputes that in per se. That it's historically people moving out of agriculture need not be a bad thing. But the question is what is the process by which this happens? What is happening increasingly today is distress-led movement out of agriculture. Historically, what you thought when you spoke about people moving out of agriculture is agriculture production improves, productivity improves, more and more people from farming households become employed in urban areas, right? And people slowly move out of agriculture in this kind of a format. That is not what you see today. Incomes are rising, but what you see increasingly today is distress-led migration of landless into the urban areas and so on, which is the worrying part. This kind of migration cannot be in any form construed as structural change in the positive sense that we used to speak about it in economic theory. That's a core difference between, as I see, between these two points. So it is in that sense too, to reduce the intensity of migration too, the question of land reforms and land distribution becomes even more urgent in the case of rural areas of our country. How do we isolate agriculture under free trade? You cannot. So you're part of the WTO agreement. Now, either you come out of it, which no country has done, and how to do it. Now, it's important to appreciate that a large section of farmers would like to have trade. And you have to appreciate that aspiration among farmers. When conditions are conducive, they would like to trade. Suppose for 2-3 years there is higher price in an international market, they would like to take advantage of that high price, and with government assistance they would like to export and get that higher price. That's fine. The point is whether you have an agricultural trade policy which is flexible enough to meet the needs of these farmers on a case-by-case basis like this, or you have a blanket policy whereby you have opened your doors and basically say anybody can come. Right? So you need a policy that is pro-farmer. You need a trade policy. The argument here is you cannot shut the doors of the nation in a globalized world. But what you need is strong regulations whereby the flow of agricultural goods in and out of the country are regulated on the basis of a pro-farmer policy perspective. That is what we are looking forward to, which is what both the earlier government and the incumbent government are in no mood to adopt. They are more in terms of a blanket, open door policy whereby goods can come in and out as they want to. Developed country subsidies are a barrier. As I said, he never got access to US or European markets thanks to these subsidies. But the question is, suppose the developed country subsidies fall. Suppose they fall. Then will you be pro-free trade? No. Because trade in the sense, even the old argument that I mentioned about when in an economic environment whereby developing countries continue to specialize in primary commodities and developed countries continue to specialize in trade in manufactured commodities, the imbalance in terms of trade that I mentioned between developed and developing countries will persist. And even if developed countries reduce their subsidies, this imbalance will not go away. So it will improve your situation a bit. Maybe you can export a few more apples to Europe. That possibility may open up. Fair enough. But that does not resolve the basic imbalance in the global trade regime, which is a legacy of colonialism. That does not go away. I don't have a solution to that. That solution to that problem lies in overhauling global division of labor. But that's a long way.
Only one point is that the whole agriculture process has become a price-centric now across the world.
Yes.
So we cannot, isolate ourselves.
I'm not saying that. That's exactly what I said. We cannot isolate ourselves. However, we need strong regulations whereby we can protect our farmers from different kinds of dumping that you have been seeing in the last few years. Now, where is the left? The left is everywhere. Open your eyes, the left is everywhere. I was part 2 months back of a 1 lakh strong mobilization of tribals and peasants in Maharashtra, in Nashik, whereby they went and blocked Nashik city. It was a recreation of what Mahendra Singh Tikayat did in 1988 in Meerut. Right? Nashik city came to a standstill for 2 days. Right? Never before has Maharashtra witnessed a struggle of that sort. It was led by the All India Kisan Sabha. More from Joint Secretary sitting here. I will not explain more, because in every state of the country you will see that left has been pulling in farmers and workers for a more farmer-friendly agricultural policy on the one hand and a pro-worker land policy on the other hand. Tribals have been mobilized, Dalits are being mobilized, farmers are being mobilized. There are struggles that are led by the left. Everybody is part of it, and it's not the left's job alone. Left is not alone in it. Multiple left groups are part of it. The mainstream left is also part of it, leading from the front. They're all part of it in leading the struggles of Dalits, Adivasis, and farmers on multiple fronts. If you have to look around, and I can give you dates of these struggles. I can give you photos of these struggles. I can give you anything. The most powerful Maharashtra Chief Minister Devendra Fadnavis was cancelled a trip to Delhi and called these peasants in Nashik, Kisan Sabha leaders, for a discussion in Mumbai the very next day, because it was getting such traction in mainstream bourgeois press that he just could not afford to ignore it. That's true. Things are happening in Bangalore. Things are happening in Andhra. Things are happening in different places, right from the northeast. I saw mobilizations of the left in the northeast recently. Different places, these struggles are happening. It's not correct to argue that it is not taking place or ask the rhetorical question of where is the left. It's there. One can argue that it should be more. It should be more militant. It should be more widespread. That's a fair point to make. But to argue that the left is not there is actually not factual. The point about Kerala I tried to answer. No, I'm not very. I know I'm getting into slimy territory here. I'm not a great believer of the second Green Revolution thing. Well, what is second? It's the problem to the first, to the land reform policy of India, of Kerala, because of the historical circumstances in which it happened, because of the different alternative governments that came that continuously and constantly reversed policies of the earlier government by diluting land reform laws from the 60s onwards. Surplus land has been lost in Kerala. Surplus land has been lost from the 60s itself. Millions of acres have been lost in Kerala, where these farmers
shifted ownership to others in the family and friends and so on. Gift Deeds Act was enacted in 1975, whereby gifts of land to others could actually be legal and hence be kept out of land reform provisions. All these are reasons why over a period of time surplus land in Kerala, that is what you can take away from landlords, has almost disappeared. Right? So there is no surplus land available from farmers to redistribute anymore. That is part of the reason also why the idea of homestead redistribution was put in place, at least as a signal measure, given that there is no land under surplus legislation. The remaining land is lying with plantations. Right? So if you want to do further land reform in Kerala, the plantation land has to be utilized to give to the landless people. Now, there are 2-3 issues here. One is a legal issue. Right? How much land can you take away from plantations legally, given that your land reform law or any such law in this regard has to have national clearance, so they can go right up to Supreme Court and get it reversed. Now, how much land can you take away from plantations? One policy would be, as the leases expire, you don't renew the lease. Right? You take back land as the lease expires, you take back the land and redistribute to the landless as and when the lease expires. Second is to ensure that large number of surplus land which is already there but stuck in judicial disputes in the courts. I think there are about 20,000 acres lying with different courts, which can actually be, you can have actually fast-track courts, special courts, land tribunals can be put in place to ensure that these cases are quickly disposed of in favor of the government and they can be taken up and given to the laborers. Now, these are different things that you should try to do in a state where population density is very high, surplus land has disappeared, and the only land that can be sort of distributed lies either in judicial disputes or in plantations which are legal contracts of long number of years. Now, this is not an easy question to answer. Any left government in Kerala has to put its head into it, see all the legal implications of it, and put in place a land reform policy which can extract as much from the landed classes and redistribute it to the landless. There is no question about it. But it's not as simple as we sometimes make it out. Thank you. I should ask the chair.
What is the impact made by ASEAN contract in this aspect?
It's adverse. It's adverse. If you take the different crops that come under the ASEAN contract, you will see that it's basically a free trade agreement that exists between ASEAN countries and India. I can explain it for a longer time, but in specific commodities, it is not an unmitigated disaster as it is often made out, but in specific commodities that Kerala has an interest in. ASEAN Free Trade Pact will have a strong adverse impact. That's already visible in some crops, but as the trade improves, you'll actually see much more adverse impacts coming in for sure.
It's only in Kerala.
Largely in Kerala. See, okay, let me put it this way. The main issue here is that ASEAN, there's some kind of a new division of labor re-emerging in a smaller canvas, right? That is, trade in services and manufactured goods vis-a-vis agricultural goods. So India wants to export IT services, India wants to export manufactured goods to these ASEAN countries. Right? In return, they would like to have agricultural commodities produced in ASEAN countries imported into India. Right? So farmers here become some kind of a sacrificial lamb for the growth of manufactured and IT services exports from India to these countries. That's a new contradiction that both the Indo-Sri Lanka free trade agreement of the earlier period and the Indo-ASEAN, India-EU, all these are related to this basic sacrificial